broadcasts live, kill all the Jews, the Holocaust never occurred. And because of the equipment we've installed through our assistance fund, meaning doors and locks and cameras, he couldn't break in. And it saved the lives of 100 human beings who were just there to be slaughtered. So first and foremost is security. The second has to do with adjudication, legislation, law enforcement, and lawsuits. This is a major tool which I think the international community and governments need to employ in fighting hate of all kinds and anti-Semitism. And thirdly, which of course should have been the first one, is education. Education, we have a challenge in light of the fact that the Holocaust is kind of getting farther and farther from us, that the lessons of the Holocaust are not learned anymore. It's just another issue in the curriculum in an era where people are flooded with info. We have a major challenge how to teach our young ones to dissect the information and find out what's true and what's fake on all counts, especially when it comes to Jews. In the synagogue in Beverly Hills, you can see that the police now sent out the camera videos. You see a white supremacist going in with the whole equipment to break into the synagogue and desecrate it. That's what you see. So there are people who are impacted by lies, and that is extremely dangerous, and we must make all efforts as leaders, as politicians, as human beings to combat it all over. What happened in labor, and I'm also commending my good friend Dame Louise Ellman, who has been a labor hero for many years and was kicked out simply for being Jewish and Zionist. It speaks for itself, and at least I told Joan, at least I think the people of Britain expressed something in this vote also against anti-Semitism. So, in conclusion, we together must put this issue of combating anti-Semitism on the agenda in a united front. I welcome my good friends from Australia. Your country is an exemplary nation of the love of Israel and respect. We can have dialogue, we can have differences, we can argue, but at the end we are friends, and there's a certain sense of moral clarity in the behavior of your system, and I sincerely hope that this will stay there always. Thank you all very much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Bougie. I would like to invite Prime Minister Tony Abbott.
Well, thank you so much, Albert. Let's begin with two truisms. The first is that the West generally is in deep trouble, possibly in secular decline. And the second is that all politicians in democracies like ours are just in it for themselves. I'm going to make two observations, one possibly unpopular, the other, I suspect, at least in this room, popular. The first is that the Brexit vote and the subsequent election that we've just had in Britain is a sign that in at least one extremely important Western country, the people have the self-confidence to embrace their freedom, their sovereignty, their independence, and their future as big players in the wider world, and not to sublimate themselves in some kind of mushy internationalism. The second is that we have in this room politicians, members of the British Labour Party, who have had the extraordinary integrity and courage to put their principles before their careers. And I would probably disagree with many of them on many things, but the hardest thing in this life is to put something ahead of yourself. And I am so full of admiration for Joan and your colleagues. And while we will no doubt disagree ferociously on many things, perhaps including Brexit, the moral lustre that you have added to public life is just extraordinary. Now, the great thing about this dialogue is that we are able to discuss some of the most contentious issues in the public life of our time in a deeply civilised way. Not without passion, but nevertheless in a way that does not prejudice mutual respect and friendship. We've got things on the agenda over these days, Trump, China, Brexit, climate change. These discussions will all be illuminating. The great thing about all of them is that the participants will leave their party hats at the door, as it were. We won't just spout the party line. We will try to speak as decent human beings, exchanging ideas. If there's one thing, Albert, that perhaps should have been on the agenda, but thus far is not, is the challenges that parties of the democratic centre-left and parties of the democratic centre-right face in this era of fragmentation and polarisation. How do we stand for things? How do we get things done that are meaningful given the difficulties that every democratic system is currently subjected to? Finally, let me say that we will have a good talk over these days, but the important thing about every conversation is that it leads to better and more effective action. There are three things which I think Australians thinking about Israel should be concerned to do. Practical things. First of all, we've got to have more direct flights between Australia and Israel. It's outrageous that, given the range of modern aircraft, to get from Australia to Israel and vice versa, you've still got to make normally 2 stopovers. It shouldn't be so hard for the people of our two countries to engage with each other in person. Second, decent countries should all move their embassies to West Jerusalem. The idea of Israel putting its embassy in, for argument's sake, Wagga Wagga because some indigenous group has got a problem with Canberra is just absurd. So we should all move our embassies to West Jerusalem. And the third is, given the fact that Israel is the only liberal pluralist democracy in the Middle East, and given that liberal pluralist democracies are under enormous geopolitical pressure, given the new emperor in Beijing, the new Tsar in Moscow, and the new Sultan in Istanbul, given that we all have to work very closely together, why not try to bring Israel into the Five Eyes intelligence sharing arrangement? Because let's face it, this is the strongest, the most practical and the most significant force for good in the wider world, and why shouldn't Israel be a full-scale member of it?
Thank you, Tony. Also speaking for Australia, I want to invite the Deputy Leader of Her Majesty Opposition, Richard Miles.
Thank you, Albert, and it's a real pleasure to be back here in Israel to reaffirm Australia's friendship with Israel and to reaffirm the significance of the bilateral relationship within Australia's worldview. We meet at a moment in time which is very interesting. There is a lot going on. For our British colleagues, we've been watching that country wrestle with the issue of Brexit over many years now, which seems, at least, to have come to a dramatic climax in the last few days, but look forward to understanding whether that is the right understanding of the British election. In our neck of the woods, Tony mentioned the rise of China, which presents opportunities but a whole lot of challenges for Australia as well, and it raises questions about the ongoing place of America in the world, and particularly from our perspective within the East Asian time zone. Here in Israel, we've been watching, I don't know how to describe the last 12 months, and I'm not sure the Israelis know how to describe it either, but we look forward to hearing about it. But it certainly has been a very dramatic period of political drama in this country as you face your third election next March in the course of 12 months. And of course, from our own point of view in Australia, this is an election year. It was an election which was not the result that people expected. The Liberals and Nationals in the room, I don't know if there are any Nationals, but the Liberals who are here, understandably, will be walking around with a smile on their face. From our point of view, it's been a difficult year, and we're wrestling with how social democratic movements now present themselves in a competitive way within the Australian context, but again, that's something that we watch in the context of Britain, the United States, and here as well. So with all of that, there's an enormous amount for us to talk about over the next 2 days, and I really want to thank Albert for bringing us together. It has become a wonderful way, in a sense, to end the year, to have this conversation. And as I look out at the room right now, what characterises it is less about seeing Israelis, Australians, Brits. I think there are some Americans here. It's not about seeing Liberal Labor. It's actually, as I look at it, a group of people who, through this dialogue, have become really good friends of mine. And I really look forward to having the conversation about all of those issues over the next couple of days. And I thank Albert for convening us again.
Thank you, Richard. On behalf of the Conservative Party of the UK, I would like to invite John Howell.
Well, thank you very much, Albert, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm sorry we were late. We only arrived yesterday, but we had an important election to fight. An important election because it has decided the fate of the UK. It has decided it over Brexit, and hopefully it has brought to a conclusion a large element of the anti-Semitism that we have faced over the past few years. Although it is a shame that last night I caught a tweet from a prominent supporter of Jeremy Corbyn who said it was the Jews that lost the election for us. And I think that that is such a shame. But let me follow in paying tribute to Joan, with whom I have worked on numerous occasions, and it's a great pleasure to see her here. This is my second dialogue, but it is my 12th visit to Israel. And I've been very pleased to be here on all of those occasions. Now, I mentioned that anti-Semitism played a large part in this election, and I'm sure that that is absolutely true. But what we have seen is just the tip of the iceberg. The UK is just the tip of the iceberg. And we seem to look at Europe as if it was just the European Union, where anti-Semitism is bad enough. The number of local councils in Spain, for example, that have been supporting the BDS movement is phenomenal. But Europe is much bigger than the European Union. And there is an organization called the Council of Europe, which was set up in 1948-49, by, amongst others, by Winston Churchill. And it includes Russia, it includes 47 member countries, as opposed to the 27 that are mentioned in the EU. And when I went with them last summer to Portugal, a place that is not characterized by a lot of anti-Semitism. I went out I spoke in the Portuguese Parliament, and I went out in the evening to sit in a little restaurant and have something to eat. And I eventually saw a lot of people, smartly dressed, going into a building at the side of me. So I asked the restaurateur, where were they going? He said, oh, they're going to a synagogue. And the amazing thing about that was the security that they had to go through, the number of armed guards that they had to face to get into that synagogue. And I thought, what a world have we created, where in a country where anti-Semitism does not play a major role, that the Jewish community feels so unsafe that they have to spend so much money in basic protections that the rest of us take for granted. Now, the Council of Europe is important because it has both the Palestinians and the Israelis as associate members. But not once has it tried to intervene to bring them closer together. And Israel itself does itself no favours there. It sends along one person, one member of the Knesset to speak there, whereas the Palestinians send along 4 or 5 people who get up and speak every time. And I am absolutely convinced that I should continue to play the role that I've been playing in speaking out for Israel at that council, because that is the way that we deal with anti-Semitism, and that is the way that we have to fight, not just for the UK, but for the whole of Europe, if we are going to make sure that we defeat anti-Semitism once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I would like to welcome our own hero, John Ryan, to address us. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert, on behalf of myself and my colleagues. We are delighted to be here once again, and we want to thank you for your generosity in organising and hosting this event. On Thursday morning, as the election was happening and queues were forming round the block and nobody quite knew how these queues were voting, I phoned my colleague Ian Austin and he said to me, you know, if this goes wrong today, you and I could find ourselves in a gulag within a few weeks' time. And then at 4 o'clock on the morning, Friday morning, as it was pretty clear what was happening, another colleague phoned me from the Labour Party who would be of like mind. And he said, what do you think? I said, I think I need to get some sleep. I've got to be at the airport at 6 o'clock. He said, where are you going? I said, I'm flying to Israel. He said, God, did you set that up just in case? I said, the Israeli ambassador to Britain did say to me, look, Joan, you know, you've been a good friend. If things go badly wrong, I'll have to try and help you to make Aliyah, even though you're not Jewish.
It's under the domain of the Jewish Agency, and we already approve you.
And it is, you know, this has been a really difficult time. And as I said the other night, we are very sad. Decent Labour and former Labour Party members, this is a grief for us. But now we've got to look forward and try and rebuild. But it's also a huge relief. And I know from conversations we've had that many of you, like us, are very relieved that Jeremy Corbyn did not make it to Downing Street. And, you know, it's been very difficult because it does go against the grain to stand up and call out your own party. I'm not tribal, but I do believe in solidarity, and I know my colleagues do. And it is a difficult thing to do. But, you know, once you've done it, it's the easiest thing because you can look yourself in the mirror, and that's a good feeling. I think in many ways, you know, there are some difficulties to come, but I think what the election does, in my view, is make Brexit inevitable. I'm a Remainer, so I'm going to have to get on with that. But I do hope very much indeed that this doesn't mean that Boris Johnson will pursue a hard Brexit. I hope that he won't do that because I think that would be a tragedy for my country. I think this result, in many ways, has been delivered by the Labour Party itself. And I think they rightly wanted to avoid at all costs being governed by an institutionally anti-Semitic party, led by a man who was palpably unfit to be Prime Minister. And I pay tribute to the good sense and commitment to decency and democracy of the British people that they delivered that result. I think they did look at the divisive and bullying and toxic culture that Corbyn brought to the Labour Party. And I think they decided that our country needed less of that, not more. And they are right. And it is right, you know, what John has said that he's seen recently. This isn't just going to disappear. It doesn't just go. Those kind of politics don't disappear because of a defeat. In fact, in some ways, they expect defeat because they think they're fighting this good fight against these overwhelming odds, but that they will win out eventually. So we have to carry on this fight. But I do think the British people in many ways were robbed of a choice and denied a voice in the most critical election of my lifetime. I do want to pay tribute to the few Labour MPs, some of whom, certainly my friends, Ian, Mike and Louise, who are here today. And we've worked together and often been very isolated in that work. And also to, they decided like me that they could not and would not campaign to put Jeremy Corbyn into number 10. And also I want to pay tribute to brave Labour peers like Meta Ramsey, who have similarly opposed Corbynism in all its grotesque forms. So I want to say thank you to them for their support and solidarity. I often find it sad that we come and speak to, and I said this to you, Isaac, when we were at the ADL summit in New York a few weeks back, and we got a tremendous response from the audience. And I said, it's a great comfort, and it is uplifting when you feel you're facing a hostile world, to get that kind of support and comfort and approval. But I look forward to the day when I talk to a non-Jewish audience and get the same response for what I have to say about anti-Semitism, about Zionism, about Israel. I don't regret for one moment standing with the British Jewish community against really the vile racism that infected the Labour Party. I don't regret, though I will miss deeply the people I represented and the community of my constituency in which I live. But I don't regret having stood up and to speak truth to power. I think that is our duty. And I think our constituents have every right, as do the whole of the Jewish community, to expect us to do that. That, we're thanked a great deal simply for doing the right thing. We have to expect many more people to do the right thing. I do regret that I think the British people were, thanks to Labour, faced with little choice. And I think there are millions of people who feel politically homeless in the UK, and many did not want Boris as their Prime Minister, but they wanted Jeremy Corbyn a lot less, and rightly so. Obviously, Boris now gets the opportunity to prove that he is going to govern for all, and certainly I hope he does, because I don't wish any ill on the British people or any portion of them. But for those of us committed to a politics of decency and hope, there is now a job for us to do. Before the country next goes to the polls, I think we must offer the British people a real choice, a centre-left alternative, free of anti-Semitism and hatred of Israel that has overwhelmed Labour. That's now our task. I strongly believe that for all of us who are friends of Israel, whether we come from the left or the right, it's also high time we took the fight to our opponents. Israel is habitually bullied and abused and attacked in international institutions, which are often, I'm afraid, dripping in hypocrisy and double standards. And I'd agree with the points John made very strongly. And it's not just the Council of Europe, of course. So I think we need to make it clear that we'll not have the human rights record of the Middle East's only democracy judged by the likes of Cuba, Qatar and Bahrain. Israel is routinely seen as solely responsible for the failure to find a just and lasting end to the conflict with the Palestinians. So let's nail this lie with a single truth. If, like me, you consider yourself a true friend of the Palestinian people, you know that the true enemy of peace and the Palestinians are the terrorists of Hamas. And finally, Zionism is bandied around so often as a term of abuse, and we've certainly seen that in the UK and in the UK Labour Party. And I'm well aware of the anti-Semitism and hatred from the far right, and we have to fight that just as vigorously. Like all of you, I'm proud to be a Zionist. So I think we need to embrace it as a badge of honour and challenge the anti-Zionists with one simple question. Just what is it about the Jewish people's right to self-determination that you find so offensive? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the conclusion of our welcome section. We're going to take a 5-minute recess and we are going to begin the dialogue.
Sorry, that